Hi everybody and welcome to this fly tying tutorial. For my pattern today I really have a special one. I'm choosing a pattern that's known as the chili pepper fly, and it's tied by a buddy of mine, Tony Spezio. There's a really great story that goes along with this pattern. Tony did not like to fish woolly buggers, and one of his buddies gave him this woolly bugger, and it was this orange, just real gaudy as Tony describes it, woolly bugger, and he looked at it and he said, "Yeah, thanks a lot," and he stuck it in his box. Now Tony's he's a professional fly tyer. He teaches a lot of tyers, and one of the first flies he teaches most is the woolly bugger, yet he had refused to fish them. So fast forward about 4 or 5 months, and his buddy says to him, "Hey Tony, have you used that fly yet?" Tony replies, "I haven't." One thing leads to another. Tony puts that fly on and proceeds to catch 12 or 13 trout in a row on 12 or 13 consecutive casts. Sometime around the 14th cast, he broke off the fish with the fly and said, "I guess I'm using woolly buggers now." The name chili pepper came to be for a couple different reasons. The most common, one of the ones that Tony told me, was that he was told by someone that fly is working harder than a chili pepper, hence the name stuck. So this is a really great fly. I owe a little special thanks out to Tony. He kind of pushes me on for some of my fly tying tutorials. He's a great guy. I met him up in New York at the Catskill Fly Gathering, and I hope to hang out with him again sometime in the future. I told him I really wanted to tie one of his patterns for one of my YouTube tutorials, and he went out of my way. We've talked on the phone a number of times regarding the chili pepper fly, and he sent me some of the materials. So Tony, this fly is for you, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk some fly tying with me. The one little variation I'm going to make to this pattern, I have a couple variations that hopefully Tony will allow me to make. He uses a standard 3X or 4X long streamer hook. I'm going to be using a curved shank hook for this pattern. I like the curved shank a little bit on the woolly bugger, and I think it really just adds a little bit more to the pattern. Hence, it also will kind of separate it from some of the other woolly buggers that are out there. The marabou, the crystal fiber, the crystal chenille, the hackle, all is going to be the same from Tony, but I'm going to be tying it with black thread. But Tony really likes the orange, this fluorescent orange collar on the pattern. So after I tie off the black thread, I have this fluorescent orange, it's called Glow Bright yarn, or Glow Bright thread. I'm going to be tying a collar with just this to just finish the fly, but I prefer to tie it with just black for everything else, and then I'll have the collar with this Glow Bright fluorescent orange thread. So again, thanks for viewing this fly tying tutorial. Let me get into tying the chili pepper fly. Well, before I get started tying this chili pepper fly, let me first show you one that Tony sent me. So that's either good or bad. I guess it's a great thing that Tony sent me one. However, it's a really bad thing if the pattern I tie today looks nothing like the one that he sent. So I'll get started on it. As I mentioned before, I have a 3X long. I'm putting in a size 8 hook for starters. I have a larger tungsten bead. It's definitely not as large as the one that Tony sent me, but I do not fish these that deep. I like to have a little bit of flexibility. You can leave the bead off. You also don't have to place any wire on if you don't want. I'm placing on some 020 lead wire. I bring that the whole way up, knock that off, wrap this section around a little bit, get everything snug. After I have the lead wire on, I'll show you a couple little tips or tricks for this fly. Typically, most tyers will recommend bringing the lead the whole way up. I'm not going to, because if you remember, I'm going to be starting off with black thread, then I'm going to finish off with that fluorescent orange collar. So I want to make sure I have a little extra space at the head to finish everything. So I'm just going to push that bead back a little bit and create just a little bit of a gap. I don't want too much of a gap, but I want a little bit of a gap to ensure that I've left some room to finish tying off. All right, let me get my black thread on here. All right, and then I'm just going to wrap over this lead wire just to make sure it's relatively secure. Again, I don't want to put too many wraps near the front. I push that down a little bit. All right, that is definitely secure now. It's kind of popping a little bit at the back, so you can either take your fingers, a pair of flat wire pliers, or you could just build up a little dam behind it to give it a nice runway down. That's what I'm going to do. All right, the next thing we're going to tie on will be the marabou. For this pattern, Tony calls for some burnt orange marabou. It's got a really great color to it. I got a fine piece of it right here. I'll show you how to tie this stuff on. I'm just going to pull a little piece of it out. Okay, and then I'm going to trim this piece and tie it on. Now, the one little recommendation that Tony makes is to tie it on long, But then once you have it tied in, pull some of it off. He likes to pull it off because he really is wary of short strikes on this pattern. So I'll show you a little technique that we use with marabou. So I tied in about the length I want it, maybe a little bit longer than I originally would even want it tied in. So I tied in somewhere around here. Just lock that in place, making my wraps going back. I might trim this butt end. I might trim it relatively close to that lead wire. And then I have everything locked in the way I want it. But it is just a little long. So what you can do with marabou, you never want to trim it, because if you trim any type of a fiber, it'll just create a flat spot there. So what you can do with marabou and a lot of other fibers, find out where you want it and just take one hand, hold it very tight, and just pull some of those fibers out. Just pull them straight out. And the ends won't be perfectly flat. They won't be perfectly lined up either, just like very few things are in nature. So that's a quick way to do it. That's not the length that I want that. The length that Tony recommends, I'll bring you back to his fly. Take a look at this pattern. He has a little bit more marabou in his than I have in mine, but he also trimmed it a lot shorter than mine. So I might try to get this close to the Tony Spezio length. So I'll just pull some of this out, snub some of this marabou, and that's how much I'm going to take out. I'm not going to bring it down as far as Tony's because, I'm fishing these in a different location than he fishes his. All right, next I'm going to grab some copper-colored crystal flash. He likes to tie a couple strands, about 4 strands on each side. So I'm just going to take 2 strands, place them under my thread, and lock them in. I'll lock them in that far side so you can see that. So now I have 4 over there. I do the same thing on my side. Take 2 strands, cut them, place them under the thread so I can hold them, and then lock them in on my side. Once I have those 4 locked in, I'm just going to wrap back just a little bit, pull them tight, trim, and now they're the perfect length. All right, next I'm going to tie in my hackle. Again, I'll reference one of the hackles I'm using. I have a really beautiful brown hackle that I'm going to use for this pattern. Let me go back to Tony's. His hackle was just a shade lighter, and that's okay. I mean, you can definitely vary the color of the hackle. I want mine just a little bit darker. I tie it as he recommends with the dull side. I'm sorry, what am I doing? Jeez, I forgot my. I might tie it with the dull side facing the front of the hook. So I'm just going to lock that hackle in, just with a few wraps, nothing crazy. Then I grab my chenille, and again, just like the marabou, this is almost like a burnt orange copper chenille. I believe he actually calls this the copper chenille. So I have an end, pull just a little bit of the fibers off so I don't build it up too much. I'm just going to place it directly on top of that hackle fiber. And I lock back. So if you look under, where I've finished, all the materials are locked in at the same place. Now I can just wrap forward, get all these little fibers secure, build up, again, that dam right behind my lead wire so I have a nice transition area. I have my thread near the bead. Now I have a little bit of space up here so I can finish and tie everything off. All right, let me first get this chenille wrapped forward. I do have a rotary vise, but I know a lot of you don't, so I'll just wrap this. But typically I leave these pieces long, then I use my rotary vise and just hold these pieces straight up in the air. It goes a little bit faster, or you can always trim them to length. I really like this crystal chenille on a lot of my patterns. It just brings out a ton in this fly and in woolly buggers in general. All right, I have it near the front. I'm just going to lock it down with a few wraps. Just place a couple in front, and then I'll trim this piece off. And like before, I want to trim it relatively close because, as always, I don't want to build up the head of that fly too much. All right, then finally I'm going to bring my hackle forward. Okay, I want to make sure I'm steering that free from everything. Once I get this going, by tying in your tip first, it's going to be really nice because it's going to tie in some of the smaller fibers near the back, and their length will get a little bit bigger as you get closer to the front. And that's about the point that I want to stop, right around there. Now, Tony recommends something really neat on this woolly bugger, because sometimes if you tie buggers and you have those extra pieces jutting forward, what he recommends doing is make that wrap, and then before you make your final wrap and tie off, actually back it off and pull some of these fibers off the hackle. So I'm just taking some of the fibers off right now. So what happens, then I can move forward, lock that hackle in place, and you'll notice by doing that, you have no like stray fibers going anywhere with the hackle. Really quick tying technique. It only takes a second to do it, but it really makes a nice finish at the front of the fly. All right, now, because I use that black, this is where I'm just going to stroke these fibers back, hold them in place, just build up a nice little section, not too crazy. I'll put in 1/2 hitch, and then I'm going to put just one whip finish. When I tie off my black, I'm going to trim it, get it out of the way. Now I have the perfect amount of space left to put in some of this fluorescent glow bright thread. Tony really recommends that this fluorescent orange collar, so I'm just going to make a few wraps, trim my tag end now. I'm not going to just tear it off. I don't want to get too reckless here. After I have that trimmed, then I'm just going to stroke these back a little bit, go the whole way back, make a couple wraps forward, look around 360 degrees, make sure everything's the way I want it. Everything is covered perfectly. Put in 1/2 hitch, extend so I have a little bit more room to play with, and then whip finish the head of this chili pepper fly. After you have it whip finished, trim your thread, and if you use head cement, you can place a little head cement right over that orange, which I'll be doing momentarily. So this is my version of the finished chili pepper pattern, courtesy of Tony Spezio. There are some differences in my pattern compared to his. I mean, if we look at the two of ours together, are they close? Absolutely. Are they the same fly? Absolutely not. I mean, we are two tires that are definitely different tires. So to kind of point out the differences again with his, he used a little bit larger bead, so this pattern's going to be going a little bit further down in the water column. His hackle was a little bit lighter, and he used just a hair more marabou and left it just a tad longer than, or a tad shorter than mine. Will they both fish the same? I sure hope so. I mean, that's the reason I tied it this way. So again, thanks for viewing this fly tying tutorial. Thanks again, go out to Tony Spezio. As always, if you have any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to leave them directly on this YouTube page, or you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody.